Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Leadership. Eric Perez with you again. Thank you for joining me on what is the fourth of a series of podcasts talking about, as you might expect, leadership. And today I am particularly looking forward to this discussion. Offline, I was talking to my guest today, who is Ben May. How are you, Ben?
Good, Eric. Good to talk.
Look, one of the things I want the listeners to understand is that a lot of the people I've been talking to are in that more industry-focused, established leaders, and I wanted to change things around a bit and talk to someone in another sector. So I'm looking at you, Ben, in sort of that IT, non-seafood industry type space, and that you're very entrepreneurial in that sense. So I've got someone who's not working for an organisation but actually runs and owns the organisation himself. So can I hand over to you to do a bit of an introduction, mate?
Sure. So, like Eric said, I run the Code Company, which is our main business. We're sort of a specialized engineering development firm. So we do a lot of web publishing, working for companies around Australia in sort of really high-end technical implementation of software. So at the end of the day, we work on websites, but at bigger scale and doing more complex things in the background. We've got a team of about 15, and we're what's called a remote or distributed company. So even though I'm based in Hervey Bay, and there's a bit of our team here, a lot of our team are remote. We've got someone as far as Cairns down to the Gold Coast, and sort of everywhere in between. So and our team will then work either from offices or from home, wherever else, and all our clients are more or less in Sydney and Melbourne. So sort of a more modern way or more flexible way of working.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So can I ask then, is your role as being the owner, the driver of the business, was that your first leadership role, or were you in another industry or in another sector before you moved into where you are now?
No, so I pretty much finished high school, and I think pretty much went straight into working for myself. So I've never had actual paid employment, any kind of actual job. So I've really learnt along the way a lot of things about the real world, as you would say. But I started off, after high school, working on web development side of things, very small projects, things like that. And over those, 12, 13 years, we're working in much bigger companies, doing much more specific stuff. The team has grown, everything's grown very organically. But I started off building websites for companies. I think one of the first ones back in the very early days would have been QSIA, when I was probably 18, 19 years old. So a lot's changed in that 10 to 12 year period.
Oh wow, you are getting old. Okay. So for the benefit of the listeners, QSI being the Queensland Seafood Industry Association. So you've given me a little bit of, not me, the listeners and me, a bit of a glimpse as to why you sort of went from school to working for yourself. But what drew you to wanting to hang up your own flag and not work for somebody else?
I think that comes a lot from sort of probably instinct, and you pick a lot of that up from how you grow up in the family around you and things like that. So my father was a fisherman, his brother's a commercial fisherman, also commercial farming. My mother ran, a garden nursery and bits and pieces. So they've always been sort of self-employed, self-taught people. Grandparents were both, ran businesses, things like that. So I think that instinctively to do your own thing just came naturally to me, and rather than going down an academic path, even going to university, didn't come across my radar as a high priority. And in things because I wasn't going down a path of medical surgeon or building bridges or things like that, I didn't place a lot of importance on that for the path I was going down. So I just sort of got stuck into working and learnt along the way, as I have with the tools that we work with, from that to running a business to managing people, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, that's an excellent segue into my next question. So in your experience, then, is there a difference between leadership and management?
Yes, and it's something it's becoming more and more what takes up my time, is managing people and realizing, for a company like ours, we're a service business, so we essentially sell time to clients, and the people I have are our product. We don't have a widget or a motor or whatever else that we can optimize and then sell at a higher price. And so that really comes back from extracting the most value from a happy team and things like that, and realizing everyone is in different directions. Some people are younger and are more, probably typical millennials or more older and have different sort of, pathways in life and things like that. So my job is to try and wrangle all of that, and how do we get, have everyone happy and working. So the difference, I think, being, I guess there's a lot of ways people explain it. Managers sort of work within the confines of what's set up. I think a leader is someone who probably tries to inspire for people to do more, to sort of lead, sort of set directions, rather than sort of work within that existing pre-established setup, I guess.
Yeah, okay. So here's one that has thrown everyone I've asked, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Leaders make mistakes. So how do you engage in correcting an error or a mistake you've made within the context of your business, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking about like the qualities that make up a good leader. I think some of the things I have not done exceptionally well, and whether training or putting more thought into that would have helped along the way, is possibly things like communication. And by communication, I mean sort of selling to your team where things are going, what you're actually working towards. I'm very good, very pragmatic in working through what's in my head and sort of all the various channels that are happening. But I've learned, not necessarily by it going wrong, but realizing sort of just by undercurrents and discussions and things like that, people, when there's a space without having told potentially, oh, here's what we're doing as a business, or here's the journey we're going on, things like that, give space to create their own narrative, potentially a negative one, because all humans' brains are hardwired to self-sabotage for some reason. So if I'm not actively telling people, here's the sort of direction I think we're doing, or this is what we're embarking on, or this is actually happening well, pushing in some positivity, because often, things are going well, people will have that space to create possibly a negative narrative, which is not constructive to anything. So I've learned that. We've sort of, I think 3-4 years now, we do sort of what we call a retreat, because we're remote. We all get together and sort of stay in a big house or building or whatever for a week or so, and sort of have more water cooler discussions. And that's something I've learned, where I've probably failed is such a hard word, but not done exceptionally well at selling that kind of part internally. I'm very good at telling that to a client or a prospect, but managing that internally. So I've realized that's probably an error in my sort of journey doing in leadership. So it's been having those honest conversations and realizing those kinds of letdowns, or things to do better.
Yeah, okay. So, again, nice segue into the next question. What's the most difficult part for you about being a leader?
It's probably that tension of how much to keep cards to your chest versus open transparency, and how much do people want to know and need to know about a business. So again, and it could be somewhat within our industry that I work in, but I was in a sort of a workshop for a few days in the US earlier in the year, and there was probably about a third of the people there. It was about 30 people, so about 10 agency sort of owners or biz dev people were saying that they actually release their full financials to their entire staff, their entire company. One of the points I think they realized that someone said was, the average employee thinks the owner or business owner makes 5 times more than they actually do at the end of the day. Like, a lot of people are easy to see, we've just sold a $10,000 project. I bet that's all going in their back pocket, that kind of stuff. So that's on that right at the end of the spectrum of how much transparency and information do we want to give away, and sort of, versus how much do people, if people were then to see, the costs associated, or maybe there was a tight quarter where we didn't really make any money, things like that, does that then create anxiety and things like that? So that's always been a tension for me to try and wrestle with, of how much is worth, how much do people think they want to know versus what do they actually need to know to be confident in the business is doing well, where we're going, they've got a job security, all this sort of stuff, in trying to get that balance right. Because probably just how I've grown up of just saying less is not always helpful, because again, it goes back to what I was saying before. People then think silence means something bad. So working that out.
Okay. So here's a couple of statements for you, and see what I want to get your feelings on some of this. So, on the job experience develops better leaders.
I think on the job experience, and this is my entire existence is on the job experience. I think that gives you a lot of domain knowledge. I don't think that gives you people skills. That said, if I had my time again, whether I'd go back and do more people-related studies or things like that, maybe. But I think on the job is more probably like actual tools of the job knowledge, not necessarily people skills.
So, and this is I'll come back to this in a minute, because there's another statement. Then I want to talk about measures of success. But in your mind, does formal education help to develop better leaders? Now, you can take that in two ways, I guess, from your journey and what you've seen in your staff that you have as senior people. Do you think a formal education will make for a better leader?
I think having some dedicated study towards that is probably not a bad idea. I think there's a lot of things, because otherwise it's just who you are as a person, and you kind of will either sink or swim. So there's obviously some qualities I have as a person just out of the box that have worked to retain and build a team, but there's definitely qualities I don't have that I should work on. So whether that's professional training in the sense of coaching, may be more effective than academic studies potentially. So I think some dedicated discipline on improving that part of a leader is probably worthwhile.
Look, I appreciate that response and the honesty in which you sort of unpack that, because one of the things that you read in the literature is anytime people are looking at leaders or leadership theory or training in leadership, that this thing around formal education comes up. And I always love meeting people, and I've known you for quite some time, but I always like talking to people that haven't gone down the traditional pathway and what I would call uber successes. So, to be in your early 30s and to have two successful businesses and to do that without any formal education suggests that there's some other X factors here around leadership that people need to look more into. So as a point of reference for me, as what I would call being an old man, but being an early career researcher, is this kind of stuff needs to be unpacked a little bit more, I think. From that perspective, have you got, in terms of your staff, now I don't want to know names or want you to name names, but do you have staff that have had the same pathway as you to get to where they are in terms of their position in industry, that they've left high school and just got in and started to work?
I only pop out of the 15, I think 2 are similar to me with no tertiary education. I think nearly everyone else has some kind of after high school education. I think a couple have done like TAFE type stuff, or most of them are grossly more qualified than me to do their job, or my job for that matter. Most of them have got bachelors of some degree. Somebody's got, I think, 2 or 3 degrees. Everyone's more qualified than me pretty much. And it's interesting to look at the people the people who have gone to school have learned things that I wouldn't say aren't specific to their job, but how they do their job is a lot better. So they've learnt discipline around communication and structure and just things like that I may have just picked up elsewhere in life. Looking at contrasting that to people who have just sort of come straight from high school to working, have found it more challenging to follow schedules and structure and sort of communicating styles, things like that.
Sure. Look, we and the discussion's been very interesting to this point, but here's one that I'm really interested in finding out. How do you measure success?
So a couple of years ago, when we had a few years where we just sort of like doubled in size. Basically, went from me and a few people to like 12 or 13 people, like within 12 months or something like that. And a lot of things went wrong in that process. The client's work never did. We managed to pull it off, but internally, and we had a lot of cracks and things like that. And it's taken, because we've still been pretty busy since then. It's taken a good year or two to get that process flipped on its head and be a bit more organized internally. One of the things we did early on, and we've been experimenting a bit, is, I don't want to say HR related things, but starting more of a one-on-one type, talking to individuals in a more structured format rather than kind of anecdotally, oh, we talk at lunch, everything's fine. Realizing they're having more of a space for people to communicate, what they're thinking, things like that. So that was probably my starting into working out what's actually in people's minds. Sort of everyone's got different anxieties or hesitations, things like that. Having those one-on-ones to start to realize, oh, okay, people are actually not, they don't just have, or they still trust you, but they still want to know that they want to hear, yes, everything's on track. Oh, we're doing well, So we did a lot of little things. We've started, and because we're a small business and we're very tech, we can try things and experiment. So we tried one way of doing one-on-ones, which had some really good things, but it was way too frequent for a small business. So we then moved to a different system where we do more formal, I think 4 times a year one-on-ones, and I've got someone who now does that. But then we also, because we're a remote business, we started, I think what's called like a pulse survey, and that would happen every week, and that would ask things about how happy you are, how's work pressure, and people's responses, and we can kind of plot that over a timeline and correlate that with, you can actually see the overall team satisfaction or happiness drops a little bit around, July, when we had this big project going live because everyone was under the pump and things like that. Starting to put some levers in to sort of see how, I guess, as a whole, our team are feeling, things like that, what feedback's coming back, even just the ability to do things like, giving a virtual high five to another employee for helping out, things like that. Started to really, I guess, try to bring the business together to feel more like a group rather than a whole bunch of individuals. And by me not doing the one-on-ones directly, I guess they could speak freely about how they feel leadership qualities are going within the business. So we've really, I guess, the metric for leadership has been satisfaction, employee satisfaction or happiness, and how have they, responded to, what I'm doing or not doing and things like that. So sort of having an independent arbiter to have those discussions, not me.
Wow. Okay. So, if I'm hearing you right, then a measure of success for you as an entrepreneur, I guess, as a business owner, is where are my staff's headspace at, and how do I better service that group of people to get a better outcome? Because it seems that you're very focused on what the people around you, because you deliver a service. So was it confronting the first time you got feedback from the external? Was it an external HR person, or was it
someone internal who does that now? But yeah, I mean, I hate any kind of appraisal of and we've done over the years when we've done branding stuff, have agencies go out and talk to our clients, and that, sweating bullets waiting for that feedback to come back. It's interesting. So I mean, it is. It's definitely confronting to hear, especially when, I guess, in your mind, your own cognitive bias is like, oh, yeah, everyone roughly knows, X, and then to come back and like, oh, nobody knows X. Like, they were completely worried about X, and like, well, hang on, I thought I was pretty clear, but so it's definitely, and it comes back to a lot of those communication styles and I think some people I've met in my time, are probably more attuned to that, where I may not be, but then also then sort of miss other parts. They're not as focused on other parts of the business. So I think that's where having the right people to sort of manage that, manage the right parts to the right job, is really paid off.
Yeah, great. Look, here's so I'll spin a little bit of some of the literature around leadership, but not to either bore the listeners or yourself. But part of what I'm doing, and I'm a PhD candidate at the moment, and what I'm looking at is the core capabilities of leaders into the future, and the two that stand out and that form part of what I'm looking at is strategic thinking and foresight as the core leader capabilities for future leaders. So I'd like to get your, and I make that distinction quite clearly from leadership, a capability of a leader, to management competency. So when you're talking management, you're talking, can you do a strategic plan? Can you organize your people? Sort of that command and control type stuff that would be expected from management. But from a leader perspective, in terms of capability. Now, some of the ones that have been raised in other podcasts and discussions I've had with people significantly smarter than me on the topic area talk about empathy and emotional intelligence and other capabilities. But for my purpose, I believe, and hopefully I can get some evidence to back this up, that strategic thinking and foresight are the key future leader capabilities. What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess they are kind of like, I guess, at the core of what those other skills amplify. So if you don't have a good strategic vision, all these other communication skills or emotional, you've got nothing to actually push forward. It's kind of like you're missing the core ingredient. Because I guess at the end of the day, people want to enjoy where they work. They want to believe where they work. I know younger people are wanting to work places that they more ideologically would align with, rather than just simply looking at a pay packet and a job title. So there's definitely got to be something. There's got to be some sort of X factor about whatever you're leading, the business, what you're trying to change, what status quo you're trying to sort of flip on its head. And I guess where I've learned to regurgitate that the other way around is you've got to be able to manage that vision back up the chain through things like emotional intelligence and communication, and sort of take the people with you. Really is the whole point of leadership, is being able to take people with you and not just sort of pull them along. I think there's plenty of things I see on LinkedIn and alike of, managers and leaders, managers kind of working, just pushing something through versus leaders trying to take them with you. So I think a leader without critical thinking, strategic thinking, hasn't really got much to lead with, I guess.
Wow. So just for the sake of the listeners and yourself, I'm going to steal that thought and I'm put that in the next piece of paper, the next paper that I might write, because that I haven't heard it put that way as an anchor for the other leadership capabilities that you might need in a particular business or let alone industry. So okay, that was great.
Because I guess without those skills, like foresight and strategic thinking, are kind of just going to fall flat, or people aren't. And I mean, one thing that, going back to KPIs you were talking about before, something we've had here for a long time is another thing that we anecdotally track is churn of staff. And I pretty much have everyone that's both clients and our staff, like, we're very stable and not sort of people rotating through the door. So that's something that I try to manage. But so there's obviously got to be some foresight and strategic thinking in there, and it's making sure that we can take those people to buy into that strategic thinking or foresight.
So in your experience, how would you characterize foresight? Does foresight and there's obviously a academic definition of it, but from a practical operational sense, when I say to you foresight in a leader, do you limit that maybe by time or by project, or how do you how would you operationalize foresight in yourself and in the work that you do?
I guess foresight to me would be having that some X factor where you can look at a problem that potentially a few other people have looked at and got a solution together that's pretty much there, but still adding value somehow, whether it's we've done this before, or challenging what people have already come up with. So sort of still having something to add, either by experience or sort of just looking at a problem differently. So foresight in technology to me is like, how we build, like, okay, this solution looks good, but in 6 months' time, if you think about this other discussion we've had, that's going to supersede this, and maybe we should actually frame this implementation slightly differently. So a lot of times teams who are working on a project are just thinking about that project. So as a leader, or I'm trying to think about, for a client's best interest, how do we marry up 3 potential streams of work, or projects or problems, and not go down and fix one thing, then we have to kind of backtrack a little bit, things like that. So that to me is foresight, is not beating the system, but sort of making sure we're thinking about where the system will be or the technology will be by the time we get there.
Okay, great. Okay, we're almost at the end, but this one I won't let you walk away without asking this question, posing this statement and seeing what your reaction to it is. Leaders are born, not made.
I think, well, I think everything is made. I think people, I know from my experience, looking at people who naturally, even in smaller leadership tasks, so that may be for us putting someone in, to manage a team of 4 people, say, right, you're the team lead. So that's a term we use a lot in development projects, is the team lead. So, and watching people who have enough self-confidence to push through that, or another big term, with technology been using for a long time, and I see it being picked up a lot more, is imposter syndrome, things like that. People who are actually very qualified but have self-doubt, and then think they don't actually belong to be this leader, and all of a sudden double guess themselves, and double guess themselves to a point where they end up, crippling their own ability of achieving anything. So I think some of the qualities that help solidify good leadership are environmental. So you probably pick them up through your teen, early adult years, and improve over time. Those kind of really core things. Otherwise, you'll struggle.
Okay, so last question, and this one has thrown me because I would typically ask this of someone who's been in the leadership game for longer than yourself, but you've being that you're entrepreneurial and you've done what you've done, take this for what it is. So what might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
For me, I think I touched on earlier, is working out probably more of the communication and sort of understanding of people's sort of emotional insecurities around employment. So being able to sort of not calm people down, put their fears to rest. That kind of part of the project, I think, that kind of part of leadership, I think. So really, sort of making people feel secure, which is an emotional quality rather than a pragmatic one. A pragmatic person like myself would see, there are jobs. I've never missed a payment. Why would I worry about this? Yeah. Whereas people, some people will read into things more. So I think if I could do something better, and something I'm always trying to do better, is connect on that level rather than a straight pragmatic, dismissive, anything else approach.
Okay, Ben May, this has been an interesting discussion. I hope to be able to, maybe if I'm doing this in 10 years' time, talk to you 20 years into the game, seeing where you are, seeing if you're going to be the new, what entrepreneur could I pin you up against? Elon Musk or... I'm
sure there'd be some analysts on their leadership styles that you wouldn't want to copy, but yeah.
Look, I appreciate your time, and for those listening, thanks again for joining us. More content to come, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast.
Thanks, Eric.
Cheers, mate.